June 12, 1944. 6 days after D-Day. Captain Jack Ilfrey is cycling down a road in occupied France wearing a beret, old French slippers, and a borrowed jacket, pretending to be a deaf-mute farmer named Jacques Robert. A group of German soldiers emerges from the woods and drags him off the road into their trench. They think he is a French civilian who might give away their position, so they keep him there for 2 hours, while British artillery shells explode around them. And the entire time, Ilfrey does not say a single word in English, because if he does, he is dead. Jack Milton Ilfrey was born on July 31st, 1920 in Houston, Texas. He joined the Army Air Forces before the war and became one of the first American pilots trained to fly the P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine fighter with twin tails and a cockpit mounted in the center nacelle. The Lightning was fast, heavily armed, and difficult to master, but Ilfrey was a natural. His ground crews nicknamed him Happy Jack because of his cheerful disposition. Every plane he flew was painted with the same name, Happy Jacks Go Buggy. In November 1942, Ilfrey was on a ferry flight from England to North Africa when one of his drop tanks malfunctioned. He was losing fuel fast. He calculated that he had enough to make an emergency landing in Gibraltar, but his calculations proved incorrect. He was forced to land at an airfield in Portugal. Portugal was neutral. The Portuguese officials seized his P-38 and told Ilfrey he would be interned for the duration of the war. Standard protocol. Nothing personal, but Ilfrey had no intention of sitting out the war in a neutral country. Portuguese officials asked him to show them how to fly the P-38. They had never seen one before. Ilfrey agreed. He climbed into the cockpit. The officials stood around the plane, watching, asking questions. Ilfrey started the engines. He explained the controls. He showed them the throttle. Then, without warning, he pushed the throttles forward, took off, and flew the plane straight to Gibraltar. The Portuguese were furious. The British were amused. Ilfrey rejoined his unit and went to war. He was assigned to the 1st Fighter Group in North Africa. He flew combat missions over Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya. On December 2nd, 1942, Ilfrey and his wingman, Newell Roberts, were strafing the Fade airdrome in Tunisia when German fighters jumped them. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 hit Ilfrey's right engine with cannon fire. The oil line ruptured. The engine seized. Ilfrey turned west and tried to make it back to base on one engine. The P-38 on one engine is no match for a 109. Ilfrey was flying at maximum 275 miles per hour, right down on the ground, ducking in and out of sand dunes. 2 109s chased him, taking turns shooting at the crippled Lightning. Roberts saw what was happening. He turned back to help. He came in low and fast, aiming for one of the German fighters. Roberts did not have enough ammunition to shoot the 109 down, so he did the next best thing. He rammed it. His left propeller hit the tail of the German plane, tearing the tail assembly apart. The 109 dove into the ground and exploded. Roberts stayed with Ilfrey the rest of the way back to base. When Ilfrey finally landed, he was shaking, weak, and barely able to climb out of the cockpit. Ground crews counted 268 bullet holes in his P-38. Ilfrey became one of the first American pilots to achieve ace status in a P-38, credited with 5.5 aerial victories in North Africa. War correspondent Ernie Pyle interviewed him for his book about the North African campaign. In 1943, Ilfrey was sent back to the United States to train new P-38 pilots in California. He completed 72 combat missions and 208 flying hours with the 1st Fighter Group. Then, in March 1944, he returned to England to take command of the 79th Fighter Squadron, part of the 20th Fighter Group. His squadron was converting to P-51 Mustangs, but Ilfrey still flew P-38s on missions over Europe. He scored 2 more confirmed aerial victories on May 24, 1944, on a mission over Berlin, one of them by ramming. A Messerschmitt Bf-109 collided with the right wing of Ilfrey's P-38 during aerial combat, tearing off 4 to 5 feet of the wing tip. The German plane crashed. Ilfrey managed to fly the damaged Lightning back to England. June 12, 1944, 6 days after the Allies invaded Normandy. The ground war was raging in France, and the Air Force was flying constant missions to disrupt German supply lines. Ilfrey's squadron was ordered to strafe trains, convoys, and bridges behind enemy lines. They flew low and fast, hitting targets of opportunity. Ilfrey found a train near Angers, France, loaded with supplies and troops. He made a pass, guns blazing, tearing through the train cars. Then the anti-aircraft fire hit him. The P-38 shuddered. Smoke poured from the right engine. Fire spread along the wing. Ilfrey pulled up, trying to gain altitude, but the fire was spreading too fast. He was not going to make it back to England. He was not even going to make it to the coast. He was deep behind enemy lines, 20 miles south of the front, in territory swarming with German troops. He had one option: bail out. Ilfrey unstrapped, opened the canopy, and jumped. The parachute opened. He drifted down, watching his P-38 spiral into the ground and explode. He landed in a field. German soldiers were everywhere. He could hear trucks on the road. He could hear voices. He buried his parachute, buried his flight suit, and ran. He was wearing his uniform. He had a pistol. He had his escape kit. And he had training. Every American pilot in Europe carried an evasion kit with maps, compasses, local currency, and fake identification photos. They also carried phrase cards with basic French and German phrases, and they were trained in what to do if shot down: evade, hide, move at night, find friendly civilians, get to the coast, get back to England. Ilfrey moved through the countryside for hours, avoiding roads, avoiding villages, avoiding anyone who might turn him in. He found a farmhouse. He knocked on the door. A French family answered. They looked at him, looked around, and pulled him inside. The family's name was Voilot, Jean Voilot and his wife. They knew exactly who Ilfrey was: an American pilot, shot down, on the run. And if the Germans found out they were hiding him, the entire family would be executed. The Voilots hid Ilfrey in their home for 2 weeks. They fed him. They gave him civilian clothes: a beret, old French slippers, Dutch trousers that buttoned up the side, a green shirt, a blue jacket. They gave him false identification papers in the name of Jacques Robert, a deaf-mute farmer. The papers said he could not speak or hear. This was critical. Ilfrey spoke almost no French. If a German soldier asked him a question and he answered in English, it was over. So the identity papers gave him an excuse not to speak at all. The Voilots also gave him a bicycle. Ilfrey's plan was to ride 150 miles north to the Allied lines in Normandy. The roads were crawling with German troops, checkpoints, patrols, convoys, but the front was moving fast. The Allies were pushing inland. If Ilfrey could make it to Normandy, he could walk through the lines and be home. The Voilots gave him food, a map, and a warning: do not speak. Do not make eye contact. If anyone asks you a question, point to your ears and say "soured," the French word for deaf. Then move on. Ilfrey thanked them. He climbed on the bicycle, and he started pedaling north. The road Ilfrey took was well traveled by German soldiers, trucks, motorcycles, foot patrols. Ilfrey kept his head down and pedaled. He wore the beret low over his eyes. He kept the jacket buttoned. He looked like a French farmer heading to the next village, just another civilian trying to survive the war. But inside, he was terrified. The first encounter came within hours. A German soldier on foot ordered him to stop. The soldier tried to take the bicycle. Ilfrey held on, saying in broken French, "Mama and Papa." The soldier pulled harder. Ilfrey pulled back. Then a truck full of German soldiers passed by. The soldier let go of the bicycle and hitched a ride with the truck. Ilfrey got back on the bike and kept pedaling. Further down the road, he stopped at a farmhouse and asked a Frenchman for water. The Frenchman gave him the water, then started asking questions. Ilfrey pointed to his ears and said, "Soured. Deaf." The Frenchman nodded and backed off. Ilfrey got back on the bike and kept moving. Further north, he came across 2 German soldiers carrying a third soldier whose leg had been shot off. They tried to take his bicycle. Ilfrey said "Mama" and "Papa" again, but this time it had no effect. The Germans commandeered the bike. Ilfrey watched them load the wounded soldier onto the bike and ride away. He was now on foot, 20 miles from the Allied lines, with German troops all around him. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? We would love to know who is keeping these stories alive. Ilfrey walked north along the road. He stayed to the side, trying to blend in with the landscape. Then, without warning, a group of German soldiers emerged from a wooded area. They grabbed him, dragged him off the road, and forced him into their trench. Ilfrey froze. He thought he was captured. He thought it was over, but the Germans did not search him. They did not ask for papers. They just pushed him down into the trench and pointed to the ground. "Stay." Ilfrey realized what was happening. Allied patrols were nearby. The Germans were in a defensive position, waiting for an attack. They thought Ilfrey was a French civilian, and they thought he might give away their position if he kept walking down the road. So they kept him in the trench. As insurance, as a hostage, as a witness who could not leave. Ilfrey sat in the trench with 6 German soldiers. He did not speak, he did not move, he barely breathed. The soldiers talked among themselves, checking their weapons, watching the road. British artillery shells exploded in the distance. Then closer. Then right on top of them. Shells landed near the trench, throwing dirt and shrapnel into the air. The Germans ducked. Ilfrey ducked. One of the German soldiers was hit in the stomach by a shell fragment. He screamed, doubled over, blood pouring from the wound. The other soldiers tried to stop the bleeding, but the wound was too deep. The Germans put the wounded soldier in a wheelbarrow. They pointed at Ilfrey. "You, take him." Ilfrey did not understand the words, but he understood the gesture. He grabbed the handles of the wheelbarrow and started pushing. The Germans pointed south, down the road. "Go." Ilfrey pushed the wheelbarrow south, away from the trench, away from the Allied lines, toward a German field hospital. It took 20 minutes to reach the medical station. The wounded soldier was groaning, fading in and out of consciousness. Ilfrey kept pushing, not knowing if this was a trap, not knowing if the Germans at the medical station would realize he was American. He arrived at the station. German medics ran out, lifted the wounded soldier from the wheelbarrow and carried him inside. One of the medics looked at Ilfrey. He handed him chocolate and cigarettes. He told him, in French, to continue heading south to Fontenay. Ilfrey nodded. He took the chocolate and cigarettes, and he walked away. As soon as he was out of sight, he turned north again, toward the Allied lines, toward Normandy, toward home. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts from World War II prisoners of war, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. From Fontenay, Ilfrey went west to Tilly. He moved through the countryside, avoiding German patrols, asking French farmers for directions. Everyone he met pointed him north, toward the front, toward the British, toward the Americans. A French farmer told him there were Allied troops outside of St. Pierre. Ilfrey kept walking. He was exhausted, hungry, filthy, but he was close. He reached a dirt road on the outskirts of St. Pierre. He could see British helmets over the top of hedges. He heard voices in English. He stepped out onto the road. Someone yelled, "Get that Frenchman out of the way." A British sergeant grabbed him from behind a hedge and pulled him down. Ilfrey said in English, "I am an American flyer." The sergeant stared at him. Then he smiled. He radioed forward headquarters. Within an hour, Ilfrey was sitting in a tent, drinking tea, being debriefed by intelligence officers. He had traveled 150 miles through occupied France, on a bicycle, on foot, in a wheelbarrow, disguised as a deaf-mute farmer. He had been stopped by German soldiers multiple times. He had been dragged into a German trench and held for 2 hours. He had pushed a wounded German soldier to a medical station, and through it all, he had never spoken a word in English. He had played the role perfectly, and it had saved his life. Most American pilots who successfully evaded capture were sent back to the United States immediately. The reason was simple. Evaders had knowledge about the French resistance. They knew the names of the people who had helped them. They knew the safe houses. They knew the routes. If they were shot down again and captured by the Gestapo, they could be tortured for information that would get dozens of people killed. So the policy was clear. Evaders go home. No exceptions. Jack Ilfrey was the exception. He argued that because the Allies had invaded Normandy, the French resistance was now fighting openly alongside Allied troops. There was little he could reveal if shot down again that would endanger anyone. The argument went all the way up the chain of command. Somehow, Ilfrey was allowed to return to combat. He flew missions for the rest of the war. He completed a total of 142 missions and 548 combat hours. He shot down 8 enemy aircraft, all in P-38s, and he never forgot the Voileau family who had saved his life. On November 20th, 1944, Ilfrey was leading a section of P-51 Mustangs, escorting 2 F-5 reconnaissance Lightnings over Berlin. On the return trip, his flight attacked ground targets in the Netherlands. Near Maastricht, his wingman, First Lieutenant Dwayne Kelso, was hit by anti-aircraft fire. His engine was smoking. He radioed Ilfrey, "I have to land now." Kelso found an abandoned airfield and put the damaged Mustang down. He climbed out, expecting to be captured. Then he heard engines. Ilfrey had landed behind him, on an abandoned German airfield, behind enemy lines. Ilfrey climbed out of his cockpit, threw out his parachute and dinghy to make room, and motioned for Kelso to get in. Kelso climbed into the cockpit. Ilfrey climbed in after him and sat on Kelso's lap. He closed the canopy, scraping his scalp in the process, and started the engine. The Mustang was not designed to carry 2 people. The weight was too much. The balance was off. But Ilfrey taxied to the end of the runway, pushed the throttle forward, and took off. The plane struggled into the air, barely gaining altitude. Ilfrey flew it back to England with Kelso sitting on his lap the entire way. Let us put this story in context. Between D-Day on June 6, 1944, and the end of the war in May 1945, the United States Army Air Forces flew over 1 million combat sorties over Europe. Of those, more than 18,000 aircraft were lost. Bombers, fighters, reconnaissance planes, transports. Over 100,000 American airmen were killed, wounded, or captured. For every 10 bombers that flew a mission, 1 did not come back. Pilots who were shot down behind enemy lines had 3 options: evade, escape, or surrender. Most surrendered. They were captured, processed, and sent to prisoner of war camps. But a significant number tried to evade. Over 3,000 American airmen successfully evaded capture in occupied Europe. They were helped by French, Belgian, Dutch, and other resistance networks at enormous risk. Hundreds of civilians who helped American evaders were sent to concentration camps or executed by the Gestapo. The journey Ilfrey made, 150 miles on a bicycle through occupied France, was not unique, but it was rare. Most evaders were hidden by resistance networks and smuggled across the border into Spain. They did not ride bicycles through German checkpoints. They did not sit in German trenches for 2 hours. They did not push wounded German soldiers to field hospitals. Ilfrey did all of those things. And the reason he survived was simple. He never broke character, not once. He was Jacques Robert, a deaf-mute French farmer, and he played the role so well that the Germans never suspected him. The escape kit Ilfrey carried was standard issue for all American airmen flying over Europe. Maps printed on silk, compasses hidden in buttons, local currency, phrase cards, fake identification photos, blood chits that read, "I am an American, misfortune forces me to seek your assistance." The kits were designed to help airmen survive the first 48 hours after being shot down. After that, they needed help from civilians. And Ilfrey got that help from the Voilow family, who risked their lives to shelter him for 2 weeks. Jack Ilfrey ended the war as a major with 8 confirmed aerial victories. He was discharged on December 28, 1945. He returned to Texas. He married. He started a business. He lived a quiet life, but he never forgot the Voilow family. He stayed in contact with them for the rest of his life. He visited them in France. He invited them to the United States. He made sure they knew that he would never forget what they had done. In the decades after the war, Ilfrey appeared at veteran events and air shows, telling the story of his evasion. He wore a custom-made, winged boot patch under his left-hand coat lapel. The patch was an unauthorized uniform item that evaders bought at Hobson and Sons in London. It was a symbol, a badge of honor, a reminder that they had survived behind enemy lines and made it home. Ilfrey also spoke about the 2 hours he spent in the German trench. He said it was the longest 2 hours of his life. Sitting inches away from German soldiers, unable to speak, unable to move, terrified that one of them would realize he was American. He said the only thing that kept him calm was repeating to himself, over and over, "You are Jacques Robert, you are deaf. You are French. You are Jacques Robert." Jack Ilfrey died on October 15, 2004 at the age of 84. His obituary listed his decorations: the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with multiple oak leaf clusters, and the French Croix de Guerre. It also listed his aerial victories, his missions flown, and his hours in combat. But what it did not list, what no medal could capture, was the courage it took to sit in a German trench for 2 hours, silent and still, pretending to be someone he was not, knowing that one word in the wrong language would get him killed. The story of Jack Ilfrey is not about heroism in the traditional sense. It is about survival, about resourcefulness, about the ability to stay calm under pressure. Ilfrey did not defeat the Germans in combat. He outsmarted them. He played a role. He became Jacques Robert so completely that even German soldiers standing 3 feet away believed he was French. The evasion also highlights the incredible bravery of the French civilians who helped Allied airmen escape. The Voilow family knew the risks. They knew that harboring an American pilot was a death sentence if they were caught, but they did it anyway. They sheltered Ilfrey for 2 weeks. They gave him clothes, food, false papers, and a bicycle. They gave him a chance, and because of them, he made it home. The 2 hours Ilfrey spent in the German trench represent something deeper. They represent the randomness of survival in war. The soldiers in the trench did not know Ilfrey was American. They thought he was French. They kept him there to prevent him from giving away their position. And when one of their own was wounded, they ordered him to push the soldier to a hospital. They trusted him. And that trust, based on a false identity and a language barrier, saved his life. Ilfrey's story also challenges the myth of the enemy as faceless. The German soldiers in the trench were not monsters. They were soldiers in a defensive position trying to survive. They were wounded, exhausted, and terrified. When one of them was hit, the others did what soldiers do. They tried to save him. And when they needed help, they turned to a civilian they thought was French. They did not suspect him. They did not interrogate him. They just needed someone to push a wheelbarrow. And Ilfrey, an American fighter pilot disguised as a deaf-mute farmer, pushed that wheelbarrow and walked away.